Welcome. I'm Julie Bacon, and you're listening to the Mindset Coaching for Handlers podcast, a podcast for dog handlers who are on a mission to achieve big goals. Here I share lessons, insights, personal stories, and tools you can apply during your next show, trial, or test to help you strengthen your mental game and hopefully cue more consistently. Be sure to check out the show notes where you'll find details about the episodes, plus important links, including the link to the Dogged Planner and Workbook created just for handlers on a mission. So if you're ready to improve your competitive mindset, get out of your own way, and connect with your dog like never before, then it's time to get comfy, bring an open mind, and work your mindset. Hey there, and welcome back to the podcast. All right, this week we're talking about nerves, anxiety, all of those things, that those big butterflies flopping around in your gut before you go in the ring, or even pressure, all of those things that we feel kind of before we walk into the ring. And I'm going to say something very unpopular, but those of you who have ring nerves, anxiety, or, kind of wherever you are on that continuum, nerves are not your problem. Okay. So that's my unpopular sentence. Okay. Turn this off now if you don't want to hear more, but, the nerves are not your problem. The pressure, the way that you feel, that's not your problem. And this is on my mind because I've been talking to people lately who just want to banish the ring nerves. I'd be fine if I wasn't nervous, or I just want to not feel this way, or, all of the things. And by the way, all of that is true. Like, nobody wants to feel like that. Like, nobody wants to be thrown up in the corner, before they go into the ring. Like, that's really, really, really unpleasant. It's a horrible feeling. But that is a symptom. The nerves that you feel are a symptom of something else going on. You feel nervous because of something else, right? You feel nervous because you feel pressure to perform a certain way. You feel nervous because you're unsure in your preparation. That's me. That's when I get nervous, if I'm not sure in my preparation. You get nervous if you're not feeling confident that day, or you get nervous if you feel someone else is watching. So the nervousness is like the outcome of whatever else is going on in your world, okay? And it could be all kinds of things. It could be a combination of things. It could be, anything, right? A whole bunch of things can make us feel nervous. Just being at a big event or being excited can also mimic nerves, right? So, being really excited and nervous feels the same way in the body. So sometimes we mistake one for the other. Usually we mistake, excitement for nerves, right? We feel excited. We feel that flip flop in our belly, or we start to get a headache, or whatever it is our physical symptom is. And we think, oh my God, I must be nervous, when in fact you're just excited. Okay. So I want you to entertain that notion as well, because I know that when I start to feel jittery, I will literally stop and ask myself, hey, am I excited or am I nervous? Actually, what is it that I'm feeling? And if nervous, where are those nerves coming from? And nowadays, of course, I can do that very quickly. I can even do that if I'm 5, 6 dogs out, from walking into the ring, if I catch it, that is. But it took a while to get there, okay, to be able to do it that quickly. But if I, sometimes I'm you know what? I'm just really excited. I'm really happy to be here. I'm excited to run my dog. I can't wait to get in the ring. Sometimes that is the answer. Okay. So I mentioned that in this context because I think we are putting a lot on nerves, on ring nerves, on performance anxiety. And we're putting a lot of things on it. We're almost putting a lot of weight, too much weight, going back to the stories we tell, but we're putting too much weight on our ring nerves. We're saying our performance is directly tied to how nervous we are. Maybe, but maybe not, right? And so I think that nervousness has become and can be at times a little bit of a scapegoat, I'm going to say. It's a little bit of the like, oh, I was just nervous, where someone else is watching you and they'd be like, oh, you look really nervous. And you're like, okay, I was just concentrating till you said that. Now maybe I am. Okay. So I want you to really start to pick apart these feelings of being nervous. Okay. Because the truth is some amount of ring nerves or performance nerves or whatever you call it, whatever your label is for it, right? Some amount of butterflies, whatever you want to call it, is actually really good. Okay. Like I want to have some amount of ring nerves or tingle or excitement or kind of electricity, because for me, it means that I'm focused. It means that nothing else is tearing my attention away from what I'm doing. So some amount of nerves does make our senses, and this is true like anthropologically, right? Like cavemen times, right? Running from the bear. Like it's true that some amount of nervousness can focus our attention in order to do the thing, right? If you've ever I don't know, if you ever had a kitchen fire or something, right? All of a sudden you are really freaking intent and all of your attention is on doing that and not, what's happening behind you or the dog barking or whatever else is going on, right? So it gives us laser focus when we're nervous, okay? That's the upside. So the downside, of course, is it can be very distracting and it can feel like fear. And in this podcast, we have talked a lot about how fear works in the body. But for those of you who haven't heard my little speech, I will make it as short as possible. In short, the front of the brain, and these are not technical terms, okay? But the frontal cortex, the front of the brain, is in charge of like seeing our environment. And if it sees something, sometimes it'll say like, I don't know about that. And it sends it to the midbrain, the ones that's in charge of emotion, the ones in charge of how we feel about it. And it says like, hey, what do you think about this? And the midbrain goes, terrifying. Like walking into that ring, like, oh my God, all these things could go wrong. I picture that, those Pixar movies, about emotions. And they're like, oh my God, pushing all the buttons. And it sends a signal back to the amygdala or the lizard brain or the primal brain. And that is the part that is responsible for, keeping us breathing when we're not even thinking about breath, keeping our heart beating when we're not even thinking about that. But it also is responsible for keeping us alive and safe. So if the frontal cortex sees something and the midbrain says that emotionally, yes, I'm worried about that, the primary brain, that lizard brain goes, did someone say fear? Got it. And in that second, in that nanosecond, it says fear mode activated. And it starts to shift blood flow. It starts to dump hormones. It starts to increase your heart rate. It starts to, your breathing gets more shallow. Some people get a headache, da-da-da-da-da. Okay. And the reason you get the butterflies in the stomach or feeling like you're nauseous or actually being, throwing up in the corner is because all of a sudden your blood flow has been diverted away from digestion and to your big muscle groups, right? Because you might have to run or fight something big. Okay. Same with your brain. The blood flow in your brain is not going to that frontal cortex anymore. It is only going to the minimal, most important things to keep you alive and running away from the danger. And all that other blood flow has been redirected. They say up to 30% can be redirected away from the brain, digestion, things like that. Okay. So there's a physiological response to when we are in a fear state. Okay. That's why you have trouble thinking. That's why when you do get really nervous and you are in a fear state, you can't remember the course, right? For instance, right? Just as an example. Okay. So it is vitally important to get a hold of our nerves. I am not saying that. I have and will do and will forever do podcasts on, nerves and how we get a hold of that and how we regain our control and get that blood flow going back to the frontal cortex. Okay. But that all said, your nerves didn't start with nerves, right? That is not the origin of what's happening. The origin of what's happening goes back to, hey, maybe this is a new class for you, or maybe you're pressuring yourself to do really well, or maybe you don't feel prepared. Maybe you didn't sleep enough and you know you're not really thinking straight, or maybe you need protein, or whatever it is. There was something that happened before you felt nervous. Okay? The nerves by themselves can be good. Like I said, it hyper-focuses you. It also is a symptom, if you will, or an outcome of you caring, of you giving a shoot, okay, about what's going to happen. If you didn't care, you wouldn't be nervous, right? If you didn't care about the outcome, which can be another reason for the nerves, if you weren't thinking about the outcome or like how you wanted it so badly, you would be like, meh, whatever, I don't care, right? You would feel like you do at home or in practice or at class, because the stakes would be lower. So a little adrenaline sharpens us, right? But we want to be able to channel it. We want to understand where it's coming from. So some of the places it can come from is, of course, fear of failure. Okay? I'm afraid when I walk in that ring, I'm not going to be able to execute the way I want. I'm going to embarrass myself. People are watching. I don't want to fail in public. I like to keep those failures private. Thank you very much. That can be. Okay. Or even what it means, like the story you're already telling about what it means if you don't cue. Another one can be unrealistic expectations. We talked about that a few podcasts ago, actually, about just having these kind of expectations about what should happen in the ring, but then you feel pressure because somewhere underneath is going, well, like, are you sure? Like, are you sure that this is going to happen? Or, and you start to have doubts. Okay. So unrealistic expectations can do that. A pressure to cue, whether you put that pressure on yourself, or, which is usually the case, or someone else in your world is putting pressure on you, or maybe you'd forgotten that you only needed one more cue for a big title until someone reminded you as you were walking toward the ring. Thank you very little. And maybe you want to prove something, or you want to get something done that weekend or whatever. Maybe you have a time pressure, but all of those can be a cause of nerves. Comparison, another really great one if you want to get nervous, right? Go start comparing yourself to others, or your dogs to their litter mates, or, et cetera, et cetera. Start comparing. You'll get nervous real fast, right? Because you're, again, comparing your reality to someone else's highlight reel, most likely. And so that comparison can really make you get all in the feels, okay? Lack of prep, like, is my problem, right? When I'm going to get nervous, it's because I don't feel prepared, whatever prepared looks like to me. For others, that shows up in like not trusting the plan, right? We make a plan, but we're like, oh, I'm not really sure if I can execute to that, or doubt, right? And all of these are tied together, right? That could lead to fear of failure, et cetera, et cetera. And then a big one for me when I especially when I do coaching is, most of the time when I see handlers get nervous, it's because they're focusing on the outcome. Very few handlers get nervous to connect with their dog if that's a process goal, right? Or make sure that, in agility, they're giving good eye contact, especially coming out of a tunnel, for instance, right? Nobody's nervous about that, okay? Nobody's nervous really even about getting a certain side change, or in rally, making sure that they, play in between exercises or something, right? That doesn't make anyone nervous. What makes people nervous is trying to cue, right? To focus on the outcome that they want, because they have doubts if they can achieve the outcome, because on some level they realize there's a whole bunch of things they have to execute perfectly, or close to perfect. We know perfect doesn't exist. I shouldn't even say that. But we know that there's a whole bunch of things they have to execute well before they can even have the possibility of cueing. In an agility, 20 obstacles, can happen in, 30 seconds kind of a thing. And so you've got to get all of that to work out right. And so on some level, they know that. In obedience, you're in the ring for a lot longer. So now you've got 5 minutes worth of time to make a mistake, right? All kinds of time to screw this up. And so on some level, even though they know that they're ready or they feel prepared, they can walk in the ring or even get close and now start to have doubts. Start to be like, ooh. Now they're not having doubts about their process goals. They're having doubts of whether they can, quote, pull it off, pull it all together, get the cue, do it. And if I ask somebody, if I were to walk up to someone, and I would never, I would never because it's the wrong time. But if I were to walk up to someone and say like, hey, you look nervous. What are you nervous about? They're going to have trouble articulating it because, again, they're starting to get in that fear state and their frontal cortex isn't working as well. Okay? The ideal situation is when you start to feel that way to ask yourself, what are you nervous about? Because if you can start making yourself think, you make yourself and your physiology redirect that blood flow back to the frontal cortex, because the frontal cortex goes, hey, I think we're being asked a question. So I need some blood flow here to think. And it sounds silly the way I say it, but it is true of what's happening. So building that awareness is also building that muscle that allows you to think rationally and really figure out what is making me nervous. What of this list that I just rattled off or something else is making me feel this way and getting me, getting my head to be kind of a mess. What is going on here? Okay. All right. So I'm going to take a quick break and then we're going to talk about how we use nerves to our advantage and how we can prepare better for those moments. If you love this podcast, you'll love the Q membership. Each month, we tackle topics like ring nerves, confidence, and mental toughness, breaking them down into bite-sized, actionable lessons. You'll also get a private Facebook group for support and access to all of my online courses. It's like having a mindset coach in your pocket. Ready to get started? Join us. The link is in the show notes or head to theqcoach.com. Back to the episode. So one of the things about nerves, like I said, it can really help us, right? Because it does focus us. It is a moment of hyper focus. And so we want to be able to tap into that piece of focus. But instead of nerves making us feel like we're, going to throw up or we're complete failures or we need to move to a different country if we don't get this right, we want to shift from our nerves being always bad and shift them into thinking, ooh, I'm activated, I'm focused, I'm ready, okay? And this sounds insane to those of you who are really struggling with like performance anxiety, right? Who are really getting all twisted about with it, okay? But I promise you that also, like it doesn't matter kind of where you are in the continuum is what I'm trying to say, this will work, okay? When we always name our nerves or our anxiety as bad, what we are doing is we are reinforcing the expectation, which is when I feel this way, I perform badly. Okay? I mean, we do positive training, kind of air quotes, for a living here, right? We're all handlers. We all know how to do positive training, whether it's clicker training or whatever you call it, right? The dog does something, we reinforce it with a treat or a mark or whatever, and we get more of that behavior. Okay? So guess what? The same applies to you. When you keep reinforcing that nerves or anxiety are bad, then you make it so. Okay? Because you're just reinforcing that over and over again. And again, your brain tries really, really hard to make you the smartest person in the room. So anything you say to yourself, it's going to try to prove true. So if you keep saying nerves bad, then that's what's going to happen. So instead, I want you to really start to embrace this idea about having an intention behind your nerves, right? What am I here to do? My nerves aren't bad. They're activating me. My nerves are focusing me. My nerves are waking me up. My nerves are like this kind of jolt of electricity going through me that just makes me really hyper aware or hyper focused. What am I going to do with that energy? Right? Your nerves can be turned into actions. That's why I always say, like, go for a walk, walk with purpose. Every time you feel nervous, instead of thinking, oh my God, I'm going to die in there, right? Think of like, oh, I feel this way. It's reminding me that I should do something. I should take a walk. I should breathe. I should, go back and connect with my dog, or I should wiggle my toes in my shoes and make sure I can kind of feel grounded to this moment. Okay. So when you start to feel nervous, again, wherever you are on that continuum, let it be a reminder. Let it be a handling cue. Okay. Let it be like every time you feel that way, instead of thinking, oh my God, right? Because that's the behavioral chain that you have set up. Okay. Feel nervous, panic, perform badly, or panic about getting panicked, right? So instead of starting that behavioral chain, think of it as how you would train a dog out of it. You have to create a new chain of behaviors. So when you start to feel like that, the chain of behaviors I want you to go to is breathe, walk around, shake it off, wear one of those rubber bands on your wrist that you can snap. People do that too. Anything to sort of like shake yourself out of it so that you can think clearly. Okay? Because if you channel your nerves, it can fuel you, right? It can focus you. It can make you find a way to level set again. But if you leave it unchecked, then it goes where it wants to go, right? It is like misdirected energy. It goes where it wants to go. It then feels like a headache, or feels like a stomach ache, or feels like I can't think, I don't remember the course. It goes into all these wonky directions. And that is what we're trying to avoid. All right. So we want to keep also backing it up. Okay. Because as we said at the top, the nerves are the result of you not feeling maybe prepared, or feeling like there's pressure on you, or feeling. So I need you to get good at being more aware and figuring out where your nerves, what's the trigger for your nerves, right? What's the thing that suddenly makes you nervous? For some people, it's just the act of going and getting the dog out of the crate. That's when sort of their nerves start. For others, it's literally like the alarm goes off in the morning. The nerves start that early. For others, it's not until they, kind of cross that magic threshold into the ring. But you want to figure out where it is that you begin to get nervous so that you can prepare for that, kind of like a preemptively get in front of that trigger. All right. And now walking into the ring isn't necessarily it's not some dramatic, traumatic trigger, but it is the moment that consistently now you've built a habit of walk into ring, get nervous, or go get dog in crate, get nervous. So you've built these chains of behavior, right? Just like our dogs build chains of behavior and build habits around them. So we need to get in front of them so that we can interrupt those things. So me, I love me a good, morning ritual, a good crate to gate, so figuring out what your mental rehearsal is, your breath work, your mantras, your journaling, planning your walkthrough, visualization, all caps on that one. So that has to be part of your plan so that you can interrupt those triggers and keep them from happening. So if for instance, that walking back to the crate to get your dog is where you start to feel all jittery, then what are you going to do differently when you walk back to the crate to get your dog? Simple question. How are you going to change that pattern? You still have to go and get your dog, obviously. But when you go back and get your dog, maybe you're listening to music. Maybe that helps, calm you down. Or maybe you're doing your breath work. Or maybe every time you walk back to get your dog, you're visualizing how you want the run to go. Okay? Maybe there's a mantra that you're repeating. Maybe you're reading your index card. Okay? So you get to change that behavior. You get to change how you respond in that moment. But you're never going to do that unless you figure out at what point do you feel triggered, or do you start getting nervous? At what point does this happen? Okay? Because the goal is to create a stable internal rhythm, no matter how chaotic things feel externally, or they're coming in from all directions. Okay? Now, the last thing I want to say is, if people are telling you just relax, first of all, they're wrong, but please don't hit them. Okay? They mean well, but the opposite of nerves is not relaxation. Okay? I want to make that very clear because I think some people think that, oh, I want to feel relaxed and calm when I go into the ring. That's great if that's how you want to feel, and I want you to have that goal. But just know that that is not the opposite of nervous. The opposite of nervous is confident and clear, right? That's the opposite of nerves. We want to build more confidence in those moments. We want to have confidence that we have a plan that's going to work when we walk in the ring. We want to feel confident that we can trust in our process goals and then trust our training to take us the rest of the way and then put us in a position where our outcome goals are possible. That's the thing I want to have faith in. Right? I want to have faith in my training. When I tell you that when I get nervous is usually, not always, but usually when I feel wonky about my preparation, well, that's me telling you I'm not confident in my preparation, right? That's a confidence problem. So for whatever reason, I don't feel confident about what I'm about to go do. Okay. So yes, I need to adjust my expectations. Yes, I need to have awareness around it. And of course I do, but I still catch myself. I'm just faster at getting myself squared back away. Right. So confidence is likely one of the problems. Maybe it's how you're dealing with pressure. Maybe you're having trouble bouncing back from even a previous weekend rather. So maybe resilience is what you're dealing with. You want to be more resilient. The ideal state for me is to be feeling resilient, strong, confident. If I can feel those feelings, then I'm much more likely to be calm, right? I personally, though, and you know this if you've listened to this podcast for any amount of time, I don't strive to be calm, okay? Now, I don't want to be chaotic either, but I like a little bit of intensity. I like the little bit of a buzz that I get from competition. I like that little electricity sort of feeling. I like the adrenaline of it. I like to compete because of those kinds of energetic feelings, okay? But not everybody's going for that, right? I like to be an 8 when I walk in the ring. Somebody else is like, oh, please God, I just want to be a 3, right? And whatever the answer is for you, that's the answer that you need to strive for. But understand that focusing on your nerves is only going to make you more nervous. We have to go back and figure out what is making me feel nervous, and that is what we can work on, right? Those are the things we can work on. We can work on our confidence. We can work on our resilience. We can work on our preparation. We can work on our rituals. And that puts us back into control, back in a process goal sort of mode, eyes off of the outcome, back onto process. And that will also make us feel more in control, which is also a good way of knocking down the nerves. Okay? So this week for homework, I really want you to think about, first of all, notice when you start to get nervous, right? Like at a trial, what is the moment you start to get nervous? And just kind of note it, write it down in your phone, write it down on a piece of paper, whatever you got handy, and notice that. And then I want you to really start to think about, why? Why am I nervous? What is it that is quote, making me, right? Nothing's making you, but what is making you nervous? Why is it that this matters? Are you thinking about outcome? Are you worried about your preparation? Do you think your expectations are a little wonky? What is it? And spend time understanding, because the more you understand about the reasons you become nervous, right? Because remember, that's the output, then the easier it will be to start knocking that back and getting more in control and feeling like the handler you want to be when you do walk into the ring. Okay? So promise me you'll work on that. And even if it's coming up at home or in classes or, different situations, start to notice that so that you can get in front of it. Okay? And no matter what you're up to this week with your dogs, I hope you have a fantastic time. Thanks so much for listening to the Mindset Coaching for Handlers podcast with me, Julie Bacon. I am so grateful for your precious time. Check out my Dogged Planner, workbook, and journal available on Amazon. Just search for Dogged Planner. I also offer monthly membership that's perfect for ongoing support of your awesome goals. Check out theqcoach.com for details, or just stop by and check out all the ways you can work on your mindset. And be sure to follow me on Facebook and Instagram at theqcoach and let me know how it's going. Finally, please share, subscribe, and leave a review. This helps us podcasters tremendously. Plus, I know I get my best podcast recommendations from friends. Thanks, and have a great week with your dogs.